What's going on, everybody? Thank you for checking out this episode. Welcome back to the Keep Klimbing podcast. Back today with my man Brian, and we are going to dig into a new topic today. We're going to talk about a recent blog post that we put out for Premier Pitching Performance. We're looking at a few things with this that for 2025. For 2025, we're really trying to, for our business, we're trying to create a little bit better and more in-depth information for people, okay? And I just said this off the mic. I'll say it on the mic too. But, it's really common to get on social media these days and get flooded with videos and information. And I jokingly said I'm tired of seeing the same bullpen video, mic'd up bullpen video over and over and over again. That's just the easiest thing to do when you have a business, I guess, like ours. That a little bit of the way that we're trying to differentiate is provide some extra context and information and dive in a little deeper. So we're doing more vlog type of stuff, informational type of stuff on our YouTube that's more video based, and then we're pushing out and doing more blog stuff on our website here. So this particular blog that we did on February 3rd, we put out and published then. The title of it is How to Throw a Baseball: The Science of Efficiency and Performance, right? And the simple concept is that, holy cow, you could talk about 100 different angles of the how to throw a baseball, but we want to look a little bit more in depth of the science of the efficiency and the performance aspects of throwing a baseball.
When I saw this and I was reading through it, because the last couple of weeks we've talked about how to throw. We've been talking about seam orientation, but one of the things that's always stuck with me, and I think this, how to throw a baseball. You talk about being an athlete. And learning how to throw a baseball athletically. And I think as I was walking through this and reading through this, that kept coming back to my head, and the basis of those things just to be athletic.
That's right. Well, and look, I think a lot of these concepts, we've talked about this with like the training age and biological age type of comparisons. A lot of this you can make as simple as you want, and you can make it as complicated as you need, and I would say most of the time on the player's side of it, we always want to keep it as simple as we possibly can.
Right.
On the coach's side of it, we're trying to understand it to its deepest, darkest depths, that then helps us maybe build some foundational truths and strategies for development that then we can take and boil down to very simple cues and objectives for the player, right? So like a lot of the data analytics is meant to help us as coaches make better decisions for the athletes. Now, sometimes the explanation of all those things to certain athletes during certain times of their career, during certain months of the year, more explanation is needed. It could be for a lot of different things, like education and understanding for the player, conviction and buy-in. That maybe you've I gave you this example. Maybe you've thrown a 4-seamer your whole life and you're really good.
Right.
We're going to switch to 2-seamers and you don't like that. It doesn't feel comfortable or whatever, right? So like understanding and explaining, being able to explain all of this science that goes into
it's like going from whitey tighties to a boxer.
Got to talk some people into it, Some people, some people you don't have to. Yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, we throw around the term like minimum effective dose a lot, and I think that's true whether the player's 30 and in the big leagues or 13 in little league, So yeah, I mean, we took this blog and we tried to slice it through a couple different things. I'm going to read the big title sequences of it. The main points of it is optimizing your kinematic sequence, which is just the sequence of your delivery, right? Your mobility considerations for optimal performance, your mobility capabilities as a pitcher, the role of ball flight analytics, and that's where some of the seam orientation and movement profiles, that's where all those things come in, how they impact the ball, force production and efficiency metrics, okay? How you interact with the ground, how you use your legs and your torso and your arms to not only generate the force, but transition the force to body segment, ultimately into the baseball. Okay. I mean, so the force production obviously starts at the ground. The efficiency metrics is how it all gets up the chain, right? And then we kind of went in a little bit deeper of like mastering 4-seam fastballs and 2-seam fastballs.
Right.
And ultimately that's the reason we included that, because that's where everybody really needs to start, quote unquote. And it's the pillar of pitching, and no matter if you're 12 or no matter if you're 30, right? Everything works off your fastball, and having a better fastball makes all of your pitches better. Just if you could do it in a vacuum in a nutshell,
I liked what you did there with the frequently asked questions,
Yeah.
having that speak.
Yeah.
I think that was cool.
Yeah, and I think most of the time, I said this in a conversation yesterday too, I think most of the time you can go do like a lot of online certification stuff, and we're building some stuff like that and resources for people and our coaches and external coaches. Most of the time when you learn something, you end up having more questions than you have answers. When
Right,
you go through an educational course, and anytime you're like expanding your horizon of like education on a certain topic, it leads you to different questions. So, we tried to snag some of those that we thought were common questions that people might read this and say, questions that they might have for applying it to themselves.
I'm gonna do this. I hope you don't mind, but it's curious to me, and these are things to me, just on an educational level. I do a lot of research, history, and things with ministry and things that I do, and language and dialect is one of the things that is very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm reading through this and listening to you here talk, we're all speaking English.
Yep.
But developing the language that you guys are using to define this process, how big a challenge has that been?
Yeah, there's definitely even like you said, even though you don't usually use this term when you're talking from a guy that speaks English to a guy that speaks English, but there's like a language barrier.
Yes,
for sure. And I think a lot of the younger coaches that we bring on, the first step is just understanding the terms and like what they all mean, right? But the sweet spot in any of this is that like when any of our guys talk to our players about it, you need to be able to understand this to communicate with our coaches or with other coaches on strategies like this. But when you go to deliver it to a player, and that's kind of what I mean from the understanding piece of it. People have heard this all the time, like you don't understand it unless you can describe it to a kindergartner type of thing,
right.
Like so optimizing your kinematic sequence, that's pitching mechanics. That's what every 12-year-old dad wants. You know what I'm saying? Like
Sure.
Optimizing your pitching mechanics. But your pitching mechanics, I think, the more you simplify things into terms like that, I think the more variables you come into to play, or more things that maybe get misunderstood or misinterpreted. Optimizing your kinematic sequence, optimizing your pitching mechanics. Your kinematic sequence, when you use like bigger terms like that, or you give a little bit more specific within my pitching mechanics, my pitching mechanics, when I say pitching mechanics to people, I think more of what they think of is is loading your back hip, keeping your front side closed, having good direction, having good follow through. All those are extremely important. When I say kinematic sequence, and I'm talking to more of our coaches, we're talking about a well timed up, efficient flow of energy, enough energy, like a measure of energy,
Kinesis,
from
right?
from body segment to body segment, right? And it's the flow of energy. It's the flow of energy through your body, and there's definitely like big pillars within that. Max external rotation, ball release, foot contact, and we have all these big markers and flags within this computer system that we have,
Sure,
to maybe give bigger names to max external rotation is just layback.
Gotcha.
Okay, it's just layback. But yeah, there's scientific terms put to things that but that's why it's really important for us to have baseball people pick up and understand this baseball science stuff, instead of a baseball scientist trying to deliver it to baseball players, because there's a language disconnect there, right? Like having a baseball guy understand these terms and data and how it makes sense, and then being able to turn back around and go back to somebody else and just be like, well, you're outside of your layback window. If I told you that, you'd be like, oh, okay, well, what, like,
I have no clue.
Yeah, right. Like you're we need
I've
to get
never
our,
heard that
we need to
terminology.
we need to get our foot down better on time. We need to, whatever. Like
Sure.
not enough, external rotation is not a good thing, but too much can also be a bad thing as well. So you have all these optimal ranges of these things, but yeah, when you're collecting data like this, and you have deeper dive data to go into to hyper individualize things for players, you have to almost like dig yourself out of that hole to then re-deliver it to a player in a very simple way.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be the goal from all of this, is that yeah, I mean, I think from a brand standpoint, what we mean to present with this is that it's very deep and very intentional, right? But then when it gets delivered to a player, so the next blog that I have coming, this is perfect. I'm glad that you brought this up, because the next blog that we have coming on Friday of this week, so this will come out, it'll already be out when this comes out. Yes, it'll be out,
right.
Is called From Data to Development, the science behind premier pitching and performance. Okay, how we take all of this and turn it into actually making sense and making an impact for our players, because that's all that matters. It notes that in this. Nolan Rapay wrote this, and it's definitely like all of our shared core value, like thoughts and opinions that he put like pen to paper on. But one of the key elements that it says in here is that like the what, the how, the why, and being able to like have it make sense and make an impact for an athlete. Let me read a piece of it. Sure. The only way the data and technology matters is if the information you're gathering ends up mattering to the athlete. Okay.
100%.
Yeah, amen. And that's where a lot of the disconnect can be. I think from a brand standpoint, what we mean to articulate is that we're pulling data. We're able to provide things that others aren't. Right. But what I don't want to get lost in the transition is that you're a 15-year-old kid and you're like, holy cow, this is way above my head.
And it's really not.
It's really not. The way it gets delivered to the athlete is really not. Like, because I hear people say that. People say that to me. It's like, oh man, that sounds great, but I just don't know that I'm ready for that.
Any instructor, when you this is why people talk about this, and I'm sure you're very aware of this, being a professional athlete. I'm sure you've talked to people that, maybe very good at what they did, but couldn't translate that information to the next person and say, hey, this is how I do it and why I do it. That to me is a impressive skill.
Yeah. I would actually say
get that information that way.
Yeah. From my personal experience, I don't think the best coaches are or were the best players. I think there's a big time disconnect. It's your people who you've probably never heard of because they weren't good enough to be in the spotlight or limelight. They had to fight and scratch and claw and try new things and fail at things, and then they probably succeeded at things. They learned through all of those experiences, and they really got 12 different angles about how I went about developing my curveball or like whatever the case may be. Like the guys that were just the ones that were the best from the time they jumped out into it, like, no, those guys usually just like what they did worked, and they didn't have to research, and they didn't have to dig into things and try new things and fail at things. Like they were busy dominating with what they had, so.
Right.
So hearing optimizing your kinematic sequence and some of these details here as a reader, of this, what are some of your thoughts or questions or things that come up from this segment?
Well, one of the things that really struck me, first and foremost, I had to go look up kinematic now, kinesis and things like that and whatnot. And one of the things you said kind of answered that question in one at the start of it, because we talk about pitching mechanics. Well, this is more about if you want to just change the language a little bit, it's pitching movement. It's
Yeah.
not necessary because mechanics have a tendency to become very rigid,
Yes.
and people try and fit everybody into the same
That's right.
rigid movement.
Correct.
This here, when starting with the legs, you're trying to, how are you setting that person in motion just from the foundation? The legs are the foundation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you set that as far as movement? Where do you go from there just
Well,
to get the person moving in the right
yeah.
direction?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think maybe you know, maybe you're knocking on the door right there. What I was trying to say earlier, a little bit better, is that like there's perception of pitching mechanics is more of like that it's supposed to look a certain way.
Right.
It's supposed to be a certain way, and we all know and can agree that your mechanics look a little different than his, than mine, than theirs, like whatever, right? That a lot of our philosophy is to take what happens on the field and work backwards from it. You got a kid or a guy that comes in and throws really hard, throws strikes, stays healthy. Like that's what defines good pitching mechanics, not like what it looks like, not it's got to be like this, it's got to do that. Now we've got certain markers that we know historically put us in a higher percentage chance to throw harder, stay healthier, throw strikes. But
Right.
but you always work backwards from the field. And if that guy's, if we get a major league guy that comes in that throws 99 and throws strikes and stays healthy, like you don't mess with that guy, even if this whole system is like, beaming red saying his delivery sucks. Like, no, it obviously doesn't. He's figured out what he needs to do to compensate.
He's fine.
Yeah, compensate for that, So hearing you say that, I'm like, man, yeah, that's perfect. I think you're saying what I was trying to say earlier, is that there's like this preconceived notion of pitching mechanics when you say pitching mechanics. When we start talking about the flow of energy and kinematic sequence, all we really care about is that a successful throw, I'm quoting this straight from there, the foundation of a successful throw lies in the transfer of energy, okay, through a highly coordinated sequence, which is your kinematic sequence, right? It doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to be a certain way. It has to flow. Now, there are certain ways that it flows best from segment to segment based off of this huge sample size of data we've already been able to collect. We've been collecting this data since 2019 to say or suggest that like, well, where's my elbow? This is a great one. Where's my elbow supposed to be at, like when my front foot hits the ground? Well, first and foremost, what are my key points in my delivery? Because some people still, I think, maybe get that wrong.
Right.
Like my first move, my timing at foot contact, my body positioning at ball release, like a lot of those, max external rotation.
Where's your shoulder as far as coming through here? Where is it comparatively?
Shoulder abduction. Yeah. So people have called that like scap load. Should my elbow be lower? Should my elbow be at 90? Where should my hand be when my foot gets in the ground? What constitutes as like a late arm, and all these things. And then what's a byproduct of a late arm and all these different things. Holy cow, I was just standing there talking with our director of pitching, Cody Fick, on Saturday, watching a kid throw, and he had a little bit late of an arm. And he said, oh, late arm, be a good guy, like to get a good changeup on. And I kind of look at him and I kind of smile, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. But if you said that to the wrong population, they'd be like, what the heck are you talking about? Because late arms, typically to get a late arm through, you have to pronate early. And so to pronate early helps you get on the inside part of the baseball a little bit more, helps you be able to, throw it.
Turn that over a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But those are all things that like get affected down the chain because of certain things that are happening earlier in the chain, So yeah, I mean, good pitching mechanics are defined by, stuff, strikes, and health. Okay. And I think when we start to put pitching mechanics in a box is where we really get ourselves in trouble with younger pitchers. Okay. Now there's key foundational principles we want to build into them, but we don't want to take out who they are as people, because like the way you produce force and the way I produce force could be totally different. Okay. You got some people who are like, real like, yeah, I mean, you got like I'm going to put it in the simpler terms. You got like your tall and fall guys, and you got your Roland Ryan, like drop and drive guys, right? And there's been guys who have been successful like that at both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between, right? Take a guy like Jacob deGrom, really tall, doesn't really get super deep in his back leg, stays really tall, kind of tall and falls, and he throws 100, and I know he's had his injury problems, but like really successful thrower. Stuff is really, really good. And you got a guy like Nolan Ryan or a guy like Max Scherzer. Max Scherzer's got a lot of bend in the knee, when he gets through that, and there's guys, all over like that. So trying to figure out the way that you're supposed to do it. Well, what type of guy are you supposed to be? And I think that's the whole point. Trying to figure out who you are. And I think the key point of it is figuring out who you are, being great at what you're already good at. That's your only way to maximize your talent, right? Because if you're a tall and fall guy and you get taught by a coach who had success doing drop and drive type of stuff, or we don't really throw these terms around, but I'm trying to say it for everybody, maybe to be able to
just a generic
comprehend that. Yeah, is that if you were trying to do that, then you're gonna feel like you're beating your head against the wall the whole time, because you're like, man, I just or at some point you're going to plateau. Like maybe you do actually pretty good with it to start off with, because it's some type of, force production that you weren't using your legs at all beforehand, but now you get to 84 and you're like, man, like I feel like I'm stronger than that guy and my mobility is better than that guy. And he throws 91. Why the heck can't I throw whatever, that might be the case, is because you have to build like yourself as a pitcher with things that like your body mobility things are like capable of, your pitching mechanics are capable of, and like how you're built and wired as a person,
Sure.
Because you got some guys that are like big and strong and bulky, and you got some guys that are like wiry and like, more like sprinters, and things like that. So I think from this overall like perspective and what we aim to maybe articulate, I guess, through things like this is that like it's trying to find the successful flow of energy, that pitching mechanics, because of the buzzword, vibes that it gives off. Like, I think when I say that to you, people automatically think and feel like a certain way of it, that it doesn't have to look like that. It needs to look like, and that's why we lean on this data, because when you come in and you have a good sequence of delivery and produce enough force, and there's no need to change it. There's no need to fix it, because it's already good. Now obviously people come to us to try to make those things better, and we try to find areas that they can get better. But the flow of energy, I think is the biggest thing to take away from a kinematic sequence.
I always like just, that baseline start, because we've talked about, you guys are doing elementary, middle school kid training as well. It's not the high level. We understand that. But when you're talking about optimizing kinematic sequence, when you've got say it's a 10, 11, and a 12-year-old, legs, hips, I got to put
Torso.
my glasses on. Torso?
Yep. Torso, arm and hand.
Arm and hand.
Yep.
If somebody says, is there one, there's not one that's more important than the other, is there?
No, not at all. Not at all, because it is such a sequence and flow of energy that one without the other is incomplete, and you're not capturing the energy into the baseball that you're able to create, basically.
Sure.
So like if your legs are really good, your hips are really good, your torso is really good, but your arm and hand isn't really good, then you're creating more force and energy than you're able to get into the ball. So it doesn't, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at a 10, 11, 12-year-old and you're thinking of this, and you're watching the kids, what's your first thought process when you're seeing that 10-year-old?
Yeah.
And
don't coach them out of a pattern that they naturally want to throw in, which is, go back to our conversations previously about youth training and pitching training, that what we want to do is we want to quickly take young kids out of throwing patterns that they feel more comfortable in to get them in something that like looks prettier or cleaner. Now, it's a fine line, trying to teach them foundational elements of like quality throwing mechanics. What is quality throwing mechanics? I think that's the lack of education that most people probably have, is that we've got all these different like drills and, towel drills and all these different, delivery drills that we can do and work on. And I think they all come from a great place. And I think at some time or another, for some person or another, that drill can be a right drill. But just to take that drill and have everybody like do it is probably like incomplete. I don't think that you can replace reps. I don't think you can replace reps. I think that getting a player to move better and have better stability or strength,
Mm-hmm.
I think helps. I think most of the movement inefficiencies come from a deficiency in, you know, stability or mobility for young players, right?
So that's where, in my opinion, and like I said, you always build from the ground up, foundational pieces. So it's got to be, I liked, it's where you started, legs, hips to torso,
Yep.
then to the arm and the hand.
Mm-hmm.
That should be the last thing you talk about is the arm. And if you're looking at this sequencing,
yep.
correct?
Truthfully, from a uh, philosophical standpoint of how we teach pitching, your arm and your hand are moving so fast. Your arm and your hand you can work all the way back up that. Truthfully, your arm and your hand is a byproduct of what your torso is doing. Your torso is a byproduct of what your hips are doing. Your hips are a byproduct of what your legs are doing. And truthfully, I don't know that you have a whole lot of success trying to coach or teach a pitcher about what happens after his front foot hits the ground, because it's too much going on too fast. That we believe that after your front foot hits the ground, whatever happens after that is a byproduct of everything you did before that. So your initial move, the way you move your center of mass down the mound and where you get your arm to at foot contact is some of the only most successful cues that you can have. Now, definitely, like, there's a lot of, so nothing after the ball gets released or sorry, after the foot hits the ground is any more or less important than what happens before it, because it's all like a piece to the puzzle. But it's just extremely difficult to like initiate change in people that late in the delivery sequence because of how much all of that compounds, right? So if I started removing layers for this, the easy one to fix and adjust is going to be your legs. And then your second easiest one to fix and adjust is going to be your hips. And then your third is going to be your torso. And then your fourth is going to be your arm and your hand.
Because once the energy is already built up to that point,
it's compounding the whole time. Yeah.
Because if you start that makes a lot of sense, because you start the energy builds from the
you
ground.
can fix where your arm's at by having your torso in a better position.
That makes sense.
Typically when you work up the chain like that, especially because it's usually like bigger muscle areas, or like, you know what I mean? Like you have more control over like what my legs are doing than really what my hips are doing, than what my torso is doing, or what my arm and hand is doing, right? So like you want to fix those things, you usually are backing up through the sequence to find where something got wrong. Because very rarely, if something's wrong in my arm and hand, usually the fix is actually the stage before it. Usually the stage before is very rarely in the arm and hand,
It's just what you did here to get to that point, right? That seems everything is a firing pin, basically.
Yeah. Typically, I'll give you a very real example. Like we want our pitchers. Every pitcher is not really just about. This is like an objectified, truth about pitching. Like you want your pitchers to have a firm front leg. Okay, not that it needs to be straight. Okay, and not that it knee can't be bent when you throw it. Nolan Ryan had a bent front knee. But what happens is once your foot hits the ground, it doesn't bend more. Yeah. That's what's important about it. Okay. So
Sandy Koufax.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like knee was bent, Greg Maddox knee was bent. Yeah. Like, there's great pitchers where their knees are bent, and that's okay. It's just once you get in the ground, it's got to be strong to have something firm to rotate against. Because if it goes and it squishes, there's a leak of energy before my upper body rotates. And that's
it just continues to leak out.
Yeah, it's just like a squishy front leg, and then it doesn't rotate as fast. If you get something down like that, think about like a ball around a tether ball, thing. Like when that thing's down, if that thing was moving, like it wouldn't be able to rotate as good, right?
Right.
If it was like picture it like instead of in concrete, it was like in Jello. You know what I'm saying? Like it wouldn't go as good. So the same concept like with your front leg. If you're having like problems with that, I think most of the time those corrections or fixes are typically because your pelvis isn't in a good place or your torso is in a good place, like something in the middle of your body before that. And I think like this isn't like foolproof by any means. It's probably a bigger and bigger percentage as you go up the chain. But if your pelvis isn't in a good place, it's probably because like, your steps right before that didn't put it in a good place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could go all the way back to, a lot of times you boil this all the way up to a pitcher's first move when they lift their leg to deliver a ball,
Yeah.
and putting that in a better sequence, and what happens at peak leg lift and that initial transfer of energy, that if all of that is good and crisp and clean, you can line out a lot of stuff down the delivery. Now, like absolutely without an understanding of what needs to happen within my delivery, if you didn't know that your front knee was supposed to be firm when you went through it, like obviously that education like helps, but typically you're like working up the sequence to help make changes. It's very rarely the segment that you see issues in that you need to correct.
It's interesting, bringing this to bear. We just, just finished over with the prep baseball showcase.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting when I'm watching a lot of these kids, that honestly, physically, as we talk about, they're not, fully. You have some kids that are bigger than others, of course, but you see a young man who, tall, wiry frame, whatnot, throwing 85 to 87 miles an hour.
Yep.
And these are the things that are helping bring those things about, correct?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that this segment of this piece is incomplete without the rest of the picture, and that's kind of where we'll go throughout this sequence. Absolutely. Is that your kinematic sequence is affected by your movement and mobility capabilities. That's the next piece of this. Your delivery and your kinematic sequence is impacted by your ability to, produce force.
I like that thought process, because nothing, you have that foundation, you start there, and then everything is a movement from that point. And then it's just kind of recycled back to that same thought process.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, how you move athletically is what this is measuring on the mound. But the reason we do active passive range of motion tests to start our assessment process is because like how you're built and how your body just moves impacts how you're able to move athletically on the mound, right? And we always say, like, don't give a mechanical cue to a movement issue. That if we see flaws in this, before we ever start to go and blow somebody's brain up about, hey, yeah, you got to do this, you got to be here, you got to do that, because it's really hard to figure out how to move fast in space like this and affect it like in the moment. You're not gonna get a suggestion most of the time from one of our coaches during a bullpen sequence that's like, oh, you're doing this wrong, you got to stay more close, or you got to sit more in you'll get little cues like that, but I should say that won't be the first time you hear from it, right? It'll just be a reminder of what you've talked about from your assessment recap meetings or training sessions before that, because it's just too hard to make. And that's some of what I think is flawed in the mic'd up bullpen and the pitching lesson and the in the moment, like coaching cues is tough because it's really hard to figure out where your body's moving in space for a 26-year-old athlete, let alone a 14-year-old kid. Okay, but what we try to do is we try to put strength and movement programs in place to get these guys moving better and more efficiently. And man, I'm telling you, 3/4 of the time that fixes it before you ever even got to say, hey, you do this, or hey, got to be here or whatever. It's just way simpler too. It's a minimum effective dose.
All this makes it makes really good sense to me, because, and I'll share something. I hope you don't mind, but a couple of years ago, Lauren, right? I threw out the first pitch. Yeah. Was it Game 7 baseball? They said, hey, you want to throw out the first pitch at Cardinals? I'm like, heck yeah. Why not? And then I got to thinking about it. I hadn't thrown a baseball.
A lot of people watching.
Many moons. So I called my son and I said, look, buddy, you got to come over here and play catch with the old dude, because I gotta.
Remember all those days I played catch with you? That you cash those in for sure.
Exactly.
You got to.
So he comes over, and just to your point, first time you throw it, you throw, and I'm thinking to myself, finding the comfort.
Mhm.
It was just really finding that place where I just felt comfortable, and how's it coming out of my hand? And I think about those things just for the simple fact that that's how you throw a baseball.
Yeah.
And I was just going to throw a first pitch, because I just didn't want to throw it in the ground or anything like that. But to me, the whole thought process. So as I'm starting to play catch with Justin first time, my arm is like, oh, that didn't feel good. You stretch it out and whatnot, and you're like, and you find a good solid rhythm, arm being in the same place, and how you release it out of your hand.
Yep.
I think about all those things just in that.
Mhm.
And so when, I got up on the mound at Busch Stadium, I'd never been out in a place like that in that respect before. I got up there and I looked around. I was like, oh, this is, oof. And I turned around and it was Jordan Walker behind the plate.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, that's a long way. And he laughed. He says, yes, it is. I'm not kidding. That's what he said. And I threw the pitch and I threw a strike.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But that was that whole process of, and when I got there, I went through and I threw it just like I was playing catch with Justin in the backyard. Yeah. And it goes to the point of just finding that, that movement, that feel, don't change that.
Athletic, repeatable movement.
And then building upon that, correct?
Amen. Yeah. And this is one of my favorite analogies to tell people as far as like the flow of energy through the kinematic sequence, is concerned, through my own trials and tribulations and excellent coaches that I was able to be around, how I'm such a visual learner, metaphorical thinking.
I think most people are.
Amen. Right. And you try to find things that are about like high level strategies like this and stories and comparisons that I can tell to people that everybody can relate to. This is my favorite one. You ready? I just told a kid this on Saturday. I said, we're talking about the flow of energy in a kinematic sequence. Okay. You've hit the ball off the barrel. Mm-hmm. Okay. And even if you haven't, you've hit a golf ball flush, you've hit a tennis racket flush. Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. When you hit the ball off the middle of the barrel, you end up feeling less.
Right.
It comes off just like absolute butter.
You're like, ooh.
And you smoked it, When I feel more is actually when I feel more disturbance to that chain.
Yep.
Okay. That kinematic
your
sequence.
Hands.
Yeah. Your hands hurt. That the bat breaks, why does the bat break? A bat breaks because you hit it at a spot where it couldn't like absorb the force. Right.
Right.
The kinematic sequence is still like there's a hitter's kinematic sequence. It's not just pitching mechanics. Like your kinematic sequence is how you hit a tennis racket overhead. Right. Like it's just your kinematic sequence for, a pitching delivery or a, hitter's swing or whatever movement that you're doing. And so in that kind of comparison, that's the type of feeling we're seeking through your pitching delivery. And that's why it's really, really hard to teach with verbal cues and feels. Because if I'm sitting there trying to feel more, well, I'll tell you, okay, I've been blessed to throw a baseball mid-90s for strikes and efficient. And the way I would describe that to people is that when I was at my absolute best with strikes, command, off-speed pitches is when it felt the easiest. Like you could almost close your eyes and just do it because it's the same feeling as the ball coming off the barrel, off the middle of the barrel, and you feel less. You feel like you're just floating. It's because the transfer of energy is so smooth from segment to segment. Another thing a lot of people can relate to is that you're mowing the lawn and you got your big gas can. And what happens when you pull the cork at the back? It all flows out smooth. Right. We're looking for that smooth flow of energy. And when we can find that, now what I tell people is that like you've kind of got to find your cues and things like that doesn't come just like overnight. Right. But when I got old enough, when I got enough wisdom about throwing a baseball and education on what I was doing, The only thing I was trying to do on a day-to-day basis from the minute I picked up a baseball or a plyo ball or anything was I was just trying to find and feel and repeat that, because once you feel it, like you never unfeel it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it, not that it never goes away. You obviously have like your ups and downs and whatever, but like once you know what it feels like, you know, it resonates a little bit more. That every time I picked up a baseball was just, I'm just trying to feel that effortless like jump out of my hand. And that's the difference, is I think that like I've thrown 92 or 93 miles an hour and felt what it feels like to have to try really hard to do that, you know?
Right,
And then
right.
I've felt what it feels like to throw 92, 94, 95, 96, 97 with it coming out just like way easier. And the only way that makes sense in my head is that the ball just jumps out of your hand. So when I got into that like time frame of my career, and like that was the feeling that I was hunting and searching for and repeating.
It's the optimal.
Correct sequence. It's the optimal sequence, and you actually feel less because the energy flows through your body way smoother in that coordinated sequence. And when you feel disturbance, or when we coach into certain,
Just feel a disturbance in the force.
exactly. Well, and that's why like there's flaws in like teaching certain movement patterns that might have been good for me that might not be good for you. That if you can't feel that jump feeling out of your hand with that feeling of what I felt, then it's not the right thing for you. You know, it's not the right thing for you. So we encourage our players through feel and environments like that to find those types of feelings and repeat that feeling over and over again, because that's where your body wants to operate. You know, you want to sit there and talk about like arm angle and all this different stuff. Like your best arm angle is wherever the heck you can rotate the most efficient and the fastest. Okay.
Right.
And wherever that is, you can't change that, because that's just the way your body's freaking built, you know?
Right.
So you got people trying to say, well, you need to get more on top of the ball. You need to do this, need to do that. Like, yeah, there might be some wisdom hidden in there for sure. Like, just to make your pitches like more effective, we need to be able to like have a good filter and take in information and considerations and understand if they're right for us. I'm not saying like, you know, don't listen to anything your coach says. He's never going to be right. Do whatever the heck you want, whatever feels good, right? But yeah, I mean, through those coaching cues, like it should be, that's the cue that I push out to like people who once they got a good foundation of what it takes to be a thrower. It's like, you know, you know what it feels like to throw it nice and easy and the ball like come out. You know, you should be trying to produce as much force. Like everyone's trying to throw as hard as they can, throw as many strikes as they can, and no one wants to get hurt, right? Like, do that, but try to do it as easy and as effortless as you can. And that's where your best kinematic sequence is going to be. So
makes a lot of sense, man.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you for checking out this episode. We're going to build on this off this blog here. Next week, the topic's going to be more about mobility considerations for that optimal performance and how that plays into the kinematic sequence. So if you like this type of content, leave us a comment, like the video, drop us some notes maybe for next week's segment, and we'll see you guys next time.